Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us with this virtual stencil making workshop. I'm outside in my home in my patio. So I'm outdoors. Just want to give a little disclaimer in case you hear cars or the bus driving by. Just kind of ignore that outside noise. But this is where I usually like to do my workshops, my virtual workshops. And like Carol was explaining how this has definitely affected everybody. And so some of the work that I do are physical workshops, right? With students, with youth at different schools, different organizations. And so since COVID, that work for myself and for many others has been impacted, and so a lot of my contracts were canceled. So I was pretty much left unemployed for a number of months. Up until recently, some organizations have been able to hit me back up to get started with virtual workshops, such as this one. So I'm really thankful, very blessed to have that opportunity to be able to continue doing my work, at least in through this method. And so that's kind of one thing that's been going on with the workshops. As far as the activism as well, I've worked with community organizing for well over 10 years now. For the past, I would say 7 years, I've been working with the Eastside Cafe and with the Warriors Community Self-Defense Program. I've been involved with that heavily for years, and we've been training participants in our community, teaching kids, youth, and women self-defense, teaching them how to defend themselves physically in whatever aspect that they need to. And so we have free workshop or free classes, I should say, for people in the community at the East Side Cafe. And I also teach self-defense classes to youth at different recreational centers. And so since everything with COVID-19 has been going on, a lot of those workshops and those classes have been canceled. So a lot of our work as a collective, as a program, has kind of has basically taken a standstill, and we're just kind of waiting right now just to make sure everything is safe to continue those practices again, especially recently, since we've seen a lot of these uprisings, these protests, and we see a lot of violence against the protesters, right, by the police. And so we always feel like, oh man, if people knew how to get out of certain holes, or if people knew how to avoid being detained physically, then that would help them out tremendously when doing these types of actions. And so we always want to tell people that it's really good information for yourself, to be able to defend yourself. And if not necessarily defending yourself, what it means is to learn how to protect yourself. And if that means getting out of a situation, then that's mainly what we teach people to do, is how to survive an attack and how to get out of those situations. And so that's basically what we do with the program. And so with things going on with the protests, we really feel like, oh man, we're hoping people take this as a learning lesson, and they end up taking more self-defense classes and more classes that will allow them how to defend themselves physically in those type of situations. So once we're back and running, then we're going to be promoting our program a little bit more, just so we can get people through the door and share that knowledge. And so as far as the artwork, I myself am a artist. I feel like I do a lot of political artwork, depending on, I guess, the messages that I want to portray and the messages that I want to share out with people. And it really takes a lot for me to really to come up with a message, and for me to really put a lot of my heart into it. I don't want to just create anything that that's just basically, oh, okay, here, me too. I want to just throw something in there. I really have to mean it, and I really have to feel the message that I'm portraying. And so, a lot of my political artwork will definitely have to do something with a little bit more personal, where I may have a personal story to share about a certain political topic, and then that's where I'll create the artwork. And I know there's people that, of course, it's okay for them if they want to create artwork that's politically inspired, even though they may not necessarily have a connection to that movement, but they want to be in solidarity and create that artwork. Then, of course, by all means, everybody has the right to do that. However, I just feel like it's a little different for my creative process. So with me, basically what we're gonna do today, getting into our workshop, we're gonna do a paper stencil printmaking workshop. And so uh, basically a stencil, let me just go ahead and show you guys a couple of the designs that I've made in the past out of paper stencil screen prints. So I usually do screen printing with paper stencils. And so here's like one of the ones that I've done that has, this is a 3-color print. It's the background, which is yellow, a middle color, which is the red, and then the top color, which is usually the darkest color, and that's the black. And so all these shapes were basically cut out of paper, and then I was able to print them on this poster paper here using the stencil screen printing method. And so normally with the screen print, we have the screen itself has an open mesh, and we're able to cut out the stencils out of paper, put the stencils underneath the screen. So then when you pull the ink through the screen, the stencil, the paper stencil will basically stick to the open screen, thus creating the stencil, the shape that we're going to be using to make the image. However, today, since we don't all have the screen printing equipment, we're going to be able to create a stencil poster just using a few common household items. So let me go ahead and go through the list of materials that we need. And so if you're joining the workshop, hopefully you had time to gather these materials. If not, then at least you can watch it and then maybe uh, uh, replay the video a little bit later at your own leisure with the materials at hand. So basically, what we need are, it's a paper, and one of the papers that we would need to apply the paint on should be like a thicker paper. It can be like the poster board I showed you, or some Bristol paper, kind of like this, that's at least like about 100 pounds or so, uh, thick paper to hold the ink or the paint. And then we also need uh, just basic white paper that'll be about the same size as your Bristol paper. So all of these should be about the same size. We also need a ruler if you have one. It doesn't have to be a metal ruler, any type of ruler that you have. A pencil or pen to make your designs, right? So just a regular pencil or a pen. We're also going to need scissors to cut your designs, right? So depends on what type of scissors you have. You can have these big scissors or the little scissors. I find that for cutting these stencil papers, the small scissors are better because they allow me to maneuver a little bit more when I'm cutting out the smaller details. Um, so the scissors, and then if you have acrylic paint, that's basically what I'm going to be using today. So you can use any type of acrylic paint or water-based paint. It can be gouache, it can be acrylic, it can be even watercolor. And one of the workshops that I've done recently with the youth is using basically condiments and household items that you can find in your refrigerator or in your kitchen, right? So we've used mustard, turmeric sauce for like a yellow color. You can use raspberries, and you can also use like tapatio, ketchup for red color, and then for like a darker color that'll stand out on top of all of those, you can use something dark like a instant coffee or soy sauce for the black colors, right? Or dark colors. And so normally the way I like to layer my stencils is in usually like in 3 colors, and usually the background color is the lightest color. I'm going to have a middle color, which will be like a mid-value color that isn't too dark, isn't too light, and then the top color usually is the darkest or the brightest color. That way, it could really pop, and it's the one that'll have the message or the main message or the main image, right? And so think about that when you're going to be looking for colors or you're thinking about your design. So we usually, with this workshop, I'm going to do 3 layers: light, medium, dark, all right? So the background, the middle, foreground, so that way it's the darkest colors right at the top. Another item that you will need is something to push the ink through the stencil. Usually when we're doing screen printing, we have a squeegee that's able to push the ink through. In this case, the way we want to push the ink through is by using a little sponge, all right? This has been the best application for me. You can also use like one of these thicker brushes, or you can also use one of these sponge brushes, right? The sponges that are on the little handle here. But I like to use just the regular old kitchen sponge that I was able to cut up into these little pieces, and they make it perfect for me to dip into the paint. All right, so I also have a couple of plastic containers if I need to pour water in there and pour my paint. So I already have my paints over here separated. I have my pink, I have my yellow, and I have my black that I'm going to use. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to tilt the camera down so that way you can go ahead and see the work that I'm doing. If you have any questions, or if you want to see something in a little bit more detail, make sure you ask, and then that way they can relay the message to me. So basically, I already did a poster earlier using this technique. And so here are the ones that I came up with. I made this poster that says Black Lives Matter. It is a 3-color poster. It is the background, the flame, and then the text on top. So the background, I'm not sure if you can tell so much, but it's like a yellow color, yellow orangey color.
Yeah, it comes through.
Flame itself is more of a kind of like an orange or a hot pink color. And then the text is in black. Made the same design, but using slightly different colors here. So basically, this is something that we're going to be creating here, and it's going to be very, very simple. You'll see. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need our Bristol paper and the 3 sheets for 3 colors or 3 designs. Okay. Now,
Perfect. We can see your work area perfectly.
excuse me?
We can see your work area perfectly.
It looks good? All right.
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, cool. Okay, so here we go. I have my thick Bristol paper that I'm going to affix this down. So I want to make sure I tape it down. Oh, that's another thing I forgot. If you definitely need some of this drafting tape or low adhesive tape. And so I'm going to put tape on all 4 corners of my Bristol paper. And the Bristol paper, I want to make sure it stays down while I'm applying the paint. Okay, all right, so this is taped down. Now, I'm going to get my regular sheet of paper for the first color, or yeah, for the first design. I'm going to position it directly over, and I don't necessarily need to tape it down right now. What I'm going to do is create a border that my background color is going to make for all the other images, right? So I'm going to measure out from the edge of all 4 sides, 1/2 inch. So I want to measure 1/2 inch here, and I'm going to go ahead and use my marker so that way you guys can probably see a little bit clearer. So 1/2 inch at the bottom, do another 1/2 inch up here. On all 4 sides, I'm going to measure 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. Once I'm done measuring out the 1/2 inch, I'm going to just draw out that the border, connect all the lines together so that way I could have my visual border, and then I'm going to cut it out. But before that, I want to make sure, yeah, everything's measured out here, and then make my lines. A lot of times I don't even use a ruler for this. I kind of like to eyeball everything, but for this workshop, I really wanted to make sure that, you know, if you're going to be doing it, then let's try to be as, I guess, as precise as possible. I'm not necessarily one of those artists that needs to be so meticulous and make sure everything is perfect. I definitely admire those artists that do take the time and are so meticulous with making sure everything is precise and perfect. But I take a different approach. I'm a little bit more organic about things, so I just kind of like free flowing. But in this case, yes, I'm using the ruler. So as you can see, I created my border here. Now I'm gonna use this to make the border on all my other sheets.
So Ernesto, somebody has a question real quick.
Yes.
Is the border on the Bristol paper or on the regular paper?
The border is on the regular paper. All the borders are going to be on the regular sheets of paper. So my Bristol paper is underneath, but the borders are on the regular sheets of paper. So I have the first sheet of paper where I measured the border, and I just have this. It's not taped down right now. The other one is, the other paper is the Bristol paper, but my first sheet of paper isn't taped down. I just kind of put it over the paper and I measured out the borders. Now I'm getting my other sheet of paper, putting it directly over it. And depending if you use the pencil or pen, and if you could see the mark underneath, then I don't need to measure it out again. I just kind of like trace over that first border. Since I could see it through the sheet of paper, I just kind of trace it without having to measure it and having to use the ruler all over again. Because these borders, they're just to help me keep the design centered. They don't need to be perfect. And now I'm placing the third sheet on top of the second one, and I'm just basically gonna do the same thing. And this is just gonna help me later on when I'm making the design and when I'm cutting out the letters or the designs. Okay, so now I have a border on all 3 of my sheets. I'm gonna get 2 and put them over here. Okay, now that I have my first sheet here, I need to cut out basically the whole center part where the border is lined up. So I'm gonna use my scissors. If you have an X-Acto blade, this is where you can use the X-Acto blade to cut it out. If you don't have an X-Acto blade, that's fine. We're gonna use the scissors, good old-fashioned scissors to cut things. So I basically fold it, make a slit onto my paper, and then I start following the border. So I want to cut as straight as possible, but again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you sway a little bit from the borderline, it's all right.
So there was one comment that
Yeah.
asked if you can give them a minute to catch up.
Yes, definitely. So in the meantime that I'm cutting this, you guys can definitely measure your pieces of paper out. This is gonna take me a minute, so I'll go ahead and cut in the meantime. Meanwhile, you guys catch up. So just go ahead and cut your paper, basically like this. Follow along the border. And that way I could show you basically what you need to have for this first sheet. And again, this is me wanting to make a type of frame or a border where the whole design is going to be nice and centered. If you feel like you would rather make the border a different shape, then you can do that. If you don't want to have a border, then you can also do that, right? So I'm just showing you basically this process. So here now I just have my 1/2 inch border, right? It's basically just the frame of the paper. And again, you can make this, if you want to make the image smaller, then you can measure 1 inch on each side, shrinking that down, making the outside border a little bit bigger, but you're going to be shrinking down your image, and that's totally fine too, okay? Right now, I just measured 1/2 inch on each side. So that's kind of like what I'm accustomed to. That's what I like doing when I create my designs. And so this is just kind of like a standard for me, okay? So once you have the first layer cut out, we're gonna put the border directly over the Bristol paper. And this is where you wanna match it up. And then you start taping down the corners of the first sheet of paper, which is the border, right? So a little bit of tape will go a long way. So you don't necessarily need to tape it down so heavy, just enough so that the paper doesn't lift when you're applying the ink or the paint, I should say. So little strips of low adhesive drafting paper would work best, so it doesn't tear your paper when you need to remove it. And again, I position the tape on each of the corners, making sure that the paper is sitting perfectly on top of the Bristol paper. And I also like to add a couple of sheets of tape or pieces of tape to the long sides of the paper, just to kind of keep it down. All right. So once we have that, then we're gonna go ahead and use our lightest colored paint, okay? So for me, I'm gonna use a yellow as the background, and I'm going to cover the whole area with this yellow. And this is where you can have fun with it, because if you have multiple light colors, kind of like the way I did this design here. I'm not sure if you can tell, but if it transfers well with the camera. But the bottom background color is a yellow, and then up here at the top half is more of a orange color. So there's like a slight gradient from the yellow to the orange on the top, and then the flame itself is a kind of like a fuchsia color, but since it's not a solid color. A lot of the yellow and the orange from underneath, you could see it, and it just gives a whole really cool texture, really good, cool look. So you can do something like that if you have multiple colors, multiple background colors. Um, so for me, I'm just going to use one color right now, and it's going to be the yellow. I like to get my sponge, the little piece of sponge, dip it into the paint, and then I like to get some of that excess off of the sponge. I don't want to have blobs on there, and we're trying to keep the paint as minimal as possible, or should I say as thin as possible. You don't necessarily want a whole thick layer of paints here because it'll get really heavy and it'll start to warp the paper. Um, and that's one of the reasons you want to use a thicker Bristol board, or like a chipboard if possible. So once we're here, I like to start just kind of like dabbing the paint on here. And I like to start from the edge, making sure that I'm getting all the edge first. And if you feel like you need to hold down the stencil part of the paper, you can hold it down as you're dabbing close to that area, right? So I like to slowly start dabbing all around. And then you'll start seeing, yeah, definitely the texture that the sponge leaves. And you yourself decide how much paint you want to add,
So quick,
or how much of that texture.
quick
Yes.
question, Ernesto. Did you damp the sponge before you started?
No, I didn't damp the sponge at all. Again, I don't want to necessarily make the paper overly watery. I don't want to weigh it down with water. So I'm not even watering down the paint. Sometimes people water down the paint. I don't. So this is straight from the container. It's pretty thick. You know, it's a pretty thick paint. So that's the way I would want to keep it. I don't water it down, or I also don't water down the sponge beforehand. Um, yeah, so then as you apply the yellow, again, you know, you kind of decide how much yellow, or how much paint you want to put down onto the paper, and whether you want to add other colors or other patterns, right? You can start throwing on, actually just for the fun of it, actually will probably add another orange on here, but I want to get a little bit more yellow down. And so if you do end up putting a blob of yellow, kind of like the way I did right now, it's all right. I get that blob and then I just keep spreading that paint to other areas. And that's one of the fun things about doing this process like this, is that it's really hard to mess up because you're just kind of dabbing the paint all over the place, and it looks like it's messy, and it looks like there's no real rhyme or reason for it, but there is, especially once you start applying the paint down. You start figuring out how to use the sponge as a tool, and you start learning that, oh, okay, cool, you know, I can turn it this way and this applies paint a little bit easier. Or you can get yeah, just different patterns, changing the angle of the sponge when you're laying down the paint. All right, so here I seems like I've done a pretty good layer of yellow here. Now, like I said, I actually did want to, just for fun, add a little bit more of another color. So I'm gonna throw in some of this orange just randomly in different areas, just to give it a little bit more depth when when we do the other colors and the other images. You see, so it's up to you how much you would want to add. So
somebody has a quick question.
yes,
Did you draw your design on the Bristol paper before you got started?
no, I make the design on, well, that's the design that I'm making right now. I haven't done it, so I'm going to do it with you guys. But I'm going to do it on the sheet of paper that I'm going to cut for the stencil. So I'm gonna do the design directly on the sheet of paper that's going to be cut as for the stencil. And I haven't made the design yet, the one that I'm going to do with you all. So I'll be making that with you all as we do this workshop. Okay, so I think that's enough orange and yellow. So as you can see, I have a pretty cool background color scheme here with just like this yellow and orange. And so once I have that done, I want to make sure that I also remove any heavy areas of paint because they'll take a little bit longer to dry, right? So I want to put that away or to the side in the meantime that I do my other designs. So that way this will dry. So very carefully, once we've covered the whole area with our background color, I'm going to remove the tape just from the stencil border, right? So I'm gonna peel it off and start removing that stencil. Put that to the side. And now I can also start moving the paint, I mean the Bristol paper with the paint. I wanted to just make sure that I don't touch the paint because I know it's wet. So since we're using water-based paints, this shouldn't take super long to dry, right? If you're doing it indoors, you can maybe take it outside and let it dry for a few minutes. But either way, it should dry definitely in no more than 10 minutes or so, especially if you applied like a light layer of the paint, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and put this one off to the side. Now, I had one that was already pre-made. And so basically it was the same thing. I have it here, this one's already dry. It had the border, right? So I basically did the same thing with this one. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and tape it down. And we're gonna get started with the second design. So the second design, what I basically wanted to do, and actually you don't necessarily need this paper here right now when you're making the second design. So if anything, I'll just go ahead and move it out of the way. Let's just pretend that, yeah, we're letting our paint, the first layer dry. And so we get our second sheet of just the regular copy paper. We'll go ahead and put it down. We don't necessarily need to tape it down right now because we're going to be making our design, which is, I had it pre-cut. And so I wanted to show you how to cut it because it's very, very simple. But I had pre-cut it earlier. And it's basically this rising sun design that we're going to be making as our middle color. So the way we do that is we have our second sheet of regular paper with the border on it. I'm gonna fold the paper in half lengthwise, okay? So I wanna make sure that the corners are touching before I make that crease. So now that I made the crease here, yeah, the corners are touching over here. All right. So once we're here, I'm going to make basically a quarter circle, just a part of it starting at the middle, half of the sheet here in the bottom. I'm gonna come up and then curve it out this way. So basically I'm just doing kind of like half an arch. So that way, once we cut it, it'll make the full half of the circle, right? Or half of the sun. And then once we're here, I'm gonna use my my ruler to make the lines, but I'm gonna put the marks down here by the sun first. So I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 marks on the sun. Not sure if you can kind of quite tell right there, but I marked this in here. Let me go ahead and see if we can do it with the markers so you can all see.
Yeah, just bring it up to the camera like that so that folks can get a better view. I was able to see it.
Cool. So basically you just do half a sun or arch like that, and then you do your markings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so 6 of them. Now what I want to do is get a ruler and go to the one that's closest to the fold, and then do a line connecting from the top of the paper down to that mark.
So, quick question.
Yes.
Can you keep reusing the border you used for this stencil over and over again?
Yes. Oh, yes, you can reuse some of the stencils that you make, especially if you take care of them and you don't right, just peel them off and then they rip. If they're in pretty good condition, then you can definitely reuse them. I've reused them. When I do stencil screen printing, I can produce an edition of about 20 to 25 prints before the paper becomes completely warped with the paint and then starts like disintegrating. So you can definitely reuse it if you're careful with it, take care of it. You'll probably be able to get a few posters off of it before it just completely becomes useless. So yeah, I would recommend trying to be careful with your borders or with your stencils, I mean, so that way you could reuse them for other projects. Okay, so when we're here, I was making these lines from the border to these markings here, just to kind of make those sun rays, right? And so they don't necessarily have to be perfect, right? So here we go. I have these. And now the one that I'm going to start cutting out first is the middle one here. I'm gonna cut out this area, the one that's closest to the crease of the paper. Not on the open side here, but on this side, right? Where we folded the crease. That's where I'm gonna start cutting first. So I'll get the scissors, and I like to start cutting up here towards the border. And so I'm going from inside of the crease, or from the side where the crease is, and cutting to the border up to the line of the first ray. And when I cut, I want to make sure that I'm cutting both of the papers since I folded it in half. So I'm cutting not just this side, but also this side, okay? So I cut from the crease to the first line of the sun ray, and then following that sun ray down all the way to the actual sun. Once I get to the sun, I don't want to cut into the sun. I want to stop at the line, and then from the crease, cut there. Okay, so then this is a little part that we should remove, and we should have our first ray cut out, right? Now, the trick to get into the other rays, since I can't start cutting from the crease, is just kind of make your own crease inside of the ray. Just fold it enough for you to be able to make a small slit with your scissors. Then straighten it back out again, and then your scissors can go into that slit that you made, and then start cutting from the inside to the rays, and then just follow the lines, right? Again, you go from the ray to the border, follow the border down to the other ray. And again, you don't want to cut into the sun. You want to stop right at the edge of the line of the sun, and then continue this one, cut this one down. Again, you don't want to cut into the sun, so you stop right at the line, and then you cut from there to there, tracing the line of the sun, right? So now that we got this other ray out of the way, you should start kind of looking like this, right? So we have the middle one cut out, we have this ray, now we just got to deal with a couple of these other ones. And then you do the same thing, fold in the middle, cut a slit, put the scissors into the slit, and cut from the inside out towards the edge of the design. Now again, just follow the lines of the design to the border, put that border here. So this is again a very easy way to do a rising sun. I really like the image of the rising sun. I've used it in the past for different posters, for different art pieces. I definitely love anything that has to do with the sun. I feel like I am a person of the sun. I love being in the sun. I love working outdoors in the sun, doing adventurous outdoor stuff like hiking, going to the beach, things like that. So I definitely love the sun. And I usually incorporate it into my artwork whenever I can. Cool. So here we go. We're able to cut out the inside ray and all these other rays. Now, basically, all you have to do is unfold it. And there, you have your rising sun. All right, cool. So now, I'll bring back my Bristol paper that has the yellow background on it, and I'm going to tape it down and fix it down so it doesn't move. Okay, if yours hasn't completely dried yet, it's all right, just give it a minute, wait for it to dry. I'll go ahead and keep moving things along, and you can go ahead and watch this later or catch up if you want, but this should go pretty quickly. So basically all you do is the same thing as you did with the first stencil, right? You have your Bristol paper down, taped down. Now you get your second paper, your second stencil paper, and you put it directly on top, just the same way you did with the first stencil. Now, it's time for you to get that little bit of tape and apply it again to each of the corners. And if you want, to the longer sides of the paper, just kind of hold that down. And again, a little bit of paper, a little bit of tape should do it. You don't need to go overkill on this. Just enough to hold the sheet down as you're doing this project. All right, so now that I've got it taped down, what you gotta do is choose a color that you're gonna want for the third layer. That's gonna be a color that'll, yeah, definitely stand out a little bit more. So I'm gonna use this hot pink. So I'm using this hot pink, and it's gonna be kind of more of like the background rather than the actual rays, and you'll see why right now. So same thing when I'm using all the other inks or all the other paints. Just dip a little bit onto the onto your sponge, and then just start dabbing it down. When you're dabbing down, a good tip is just to kind of hold the paper down close to the area where you're applying the paint. Right, so here we go. That you work my way from the top down. Again, it's up to you how much paint you want to use. If you really want to load it up with paint, I suggest doing coats at a time, kind of like when you're doing any type of a house painting, when you're painting a room or when you're painting yeah, like a wall, right, or a house. You don't just throw on heavy layers of paint. You got to paint light layers at a time, because then you end up with globs of paint and it doesn't look very pretty. And then once we're there, keep going. This should be pretty easy. I think a lot of people end up getting kind of a little desperate or impatient in this process or in these steps once they're getting close to finishing up. I think people are just wanna finish it up real quick, but take your time with this. You know, it's very therapeutic being able to dab down the paint. I really enjoy this process because it's so fun. It's so easy just to be able to apply the paint this way. Right, so we're almost done here. Apply a little bit more. Gotta get these bottom rays. All right, and again, you can also mix the colors and mix this pink maybe with like a red, or with like a fuchsia, or just like another color that'll complement it. Oh, all right. So now that it looks like, yeah, I got everything covered with the pink for my sun rays. I'm gonna go ahead and gently, again, start removing the tape so I can peel up the stencil. And here you just wanna be slightly careful so you don't push the stencil into the paint and then smear your paint all over the design, right? So lifting out the tape, and there you go. Cool. All right. So once we have that, we have this open area here, which would be the sun, right? And then we have the rays coming out. And here, one thing I forgot to mention that I wanted to do for this particular design was have a little bit more of a circle. So let me move this. Just one little part that I forgot to mention is we have the sun rays, right? And we kind of have the sun here, but I also want to add another part there with the pink to make it look like the sun. So if we go back to our stencil that we're using right now for the sun, since it was folded in half, kind of forgot to mention that I wanted to make another circle on the inside and then cut that part out as well. So once we're here, and here it's easy because you're able to just cut from the crease, go down to the border. There we go. That was the one extra part I forgot to add. Put it back down. Back on top. And here you can, it's very easy to match up because you just did it right now. So it should be pretty easy to match up here. Cool. So once I have this back down, I should have done this in the first place, but I forgot to create this little inner part here. So once you do that, and just go ahead and go back and fill that part in. There we go. Fill that out. Cool. All right. So there it goes, right? So we have our rising sun. All right. Now, you can do a bunch of these at a time. So the way you would do a few of these at a time, kind of like the way I did these was I did all the background colors first. So I did all the yellows on the different sheets first, let that dry, then do all the middle colors first, second, let those dry, and then do all the top colors last, once you have all the other colors applied and dried. So I'm gonna put that off to the side and let it dry in the meantime that we work with our main design, which is going to be the message, right? So now we have our third sheet, our final sheet with the border in it. So we'll put it down. And now I just basically want to create whatever message you would want, right? You create that message. But for me, I'm going to just keep it simple right now for the workshop and just put the words rise up, right? So since we're using a rising sun, I'm going to put rise up. So you can eyeball it. I usually eyeball all of my text and I just kind of like freehand it. But if you want to be pretty precise about things and you want to make sure things are even, you can also use your ruler to measure things out. So from the border up here that we made from the 1/2 inch border, I'm going to measure 1 inch at the top and another inch at the bottom. That way my text is going to be within that. And then another inch from the left. So I'm just basically making another border, but this is just going to be to constrain my text to this area here. So then I just make the lines, draw these lines out. And again, this is mainly just to keep all my artwork framed up and centered. You, of course, decide however you would want to do your artwork. So once from here to here, I'm going to measure it out from my inside borders from the top down, measures 14 inches. So half of that is 7, right? So we're over here, 7, 7. And make a line going across at the halfway mark. So I'm gonna do my letters that say rise up. So that way they're all centered, right? So then what I like to do is just kind of do it with regular letters, and then I square them out to make like block letters. So I just quickly write the words like rise. I don't necessarily use any particular font. I just freehand everything, rise, and then up. Okay, so I just wrote it down. Now I'm going to, if using like a fat marker helps, then go ahead and use that. But for me, I'll go ahead and trace and make block letters, tracing out the letters that I wrote down. So basically, it's like if I'm giving them like a outer coat, like an outer outline. So rise, and then here we go with all right. So, like I said, I just write it down and then I kind of make this outline, this thicker outline, and that's what I'm gonna cut out, okay? So if I wanna get in there, basically do the same thing that I showed you when we were cutting the sun rays. I can fold into the shape, cut a slit, and then start cutting from the inside to the edges. Now here, if you can try and keep your text as intact as possible, then you can possibly use those letters for an inverted stencil. So I have all of my letters that I cut up from the Black Lives Matter poster. These are all the letters, and I'm able to, I'll be able to use this for an inverted screen print or an inverted stencil. Basically, you're just putting the shapes down and you're applying the ink the same way, except you're going to get the shape from the outside, right? Cool. All right. So going back to cutting out my letters, this is one reason I really like to just take my time and make sure that when I cut out the letters, they're as intact as possible. So here we go, cutting. I like to try to have sometimes have these cut out beforehand, so that way we're, you know, you guys aren't just watching me cut paper, but I wanted to see you guys. I wanted you all to see basically the whole process, even if it takes a little bit, where I'm just here kind of cutting away. And that's also one of the reasons I wanted to make a shorter phrase, because I knew it was going to be a lot of cutting involved. Okay, so I save my letters. So here's the E. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Pull in, make a slit, then put my scissors in there. You follow along. Again, all of this you can also do with, which I think will be easier, and I should probably do that right now, with the X-Acto knife. All right, so you saw me cut out the E with the scissors. Just to move things a little bit faster, I'm gonna use my X-Acto blade. I have a self-healing mat in the bottom here. So if you don't have one of these self-healing mats, it's okay. Just try to use something where, you know, that's gonna absorb the blade at the bottom underneath it. So like an old cardboard would be okay, or another Bristol paper. So right now, basically what I'm gonna do is just cut out the letters using my X-Acto blade. And I love using these X-Acto blades because they just make the stencils so much easier to cut out. And they're so versatile, so I can cut all kinds of shapes out for my paper stencils. But when I do the workshops with the kids, obviously they can't be using the X-Acto blades, so we just use the scissors, which is why I'm very used to just using scissors for a lot of my designs. But for the sake of the workshop right now, I think I'll be able to get away with using the blades, so that way we don't eat up so much time. All right. And X-Acto blades aren't necessarily overly pricey. I think I've seen them at art stores for as little as $5 for the set, which would have the blade, I mean, yeah, the handle and a couple of extra blades.
I've seen them at 99-cent stores, but you get what you
Yeah,
pay
right.
for.
Yeah. So they're not super expensive, and you can find the variety. And those that you see at the 99-cent store, those work just fine. You know, I've used some of those too. I forgot that they are available at the 99-cent store, and they work fine. So here, again, once you get used to using these blades, you really want to start making a lot of stencils. That's one of the reasons I started making paper stencils for my artwork, was because they're just so easy to make. I got pretty good at making editions of my screen printed artwork, and they sell pretty well. And I love the fact that they're easy to make, so I don't sell them for much. I think I sell my my printed my stencil, paper stencil screen prints for like as little as $3 to $5, because yeah, I feel like um, they they don't take a lot to make. Or at least I'm used to it already. Maybe it is a process for some people, but since I've been used to it, like, all right, so here we go. I was able to cut this up. Right, so here I have my paper stencil with the final design that'll say "Rise Up." All right, so now I'm gonna reach over here for my paper, and yeah, see, this seems dry. Within a couple minutes, this thing dried up already, right? So I have my sun here. I'm gonna go ahead and tape it down. Now I'm gonna get my final stencil and put it directly on top. Now again, I don't need to put in or guess a lot, because the papers should match up. Just put them directly on top of each other, match up the corners, and again, just tape it down. Remember, you don't need a lot of tape to hold these down. Just a little strip on each of the corners. And if you want to put another couple of strips on the side of the paper, on the long side, over here and over here. Cool. All right, so that's there. That should look pretty good. Now I'm gonna get my final color, which is, in this case, I'm gonna use a black, just so it can really pop with these other fluorescent colors, because the yellow that I'm using and the pink that I'm using, I'm not sure if you could tell with the camera, but they're pretty much a fluorescent inks or fluorescent paints rather that I've been using. All right, so now I'm gonna start with the final color, and the application is the same, and now I'm using the dark color, so right away you're gonna see that it covers up the other colors underneath, but in some of those areas you still see the colors coming through, which is really cool, which is what I think gives this these designs and this process a lot of depth. And now if you don't want to have any of those colors show through, then yeah, you'll end up doing a few layers of it. Like I suggested, light layers at a time, so it's not heavy blobs of paint that you have on your paper. And then remember to hold down the paper in certain areas where you're applying the paint, because they do want to lift up. So you do want to make sure that you're holding that down and it doesn't lift up and possibly tear, because it is a thin piece of paper. So if you mistreat it or if you're not careful with it, you could easily tear your stencil design. Here. And you see that it does work really well, and it starts taking shape. A lot of times you don't know what you're gonna get though until you lift the stencil out. It might look like, oh, I don't know if this is looking cool. It just looks like a mess. But once you remove that stencil and you see it, and you see the final design along with all the other colors, and then you're like, oh wow, that looks very, very cool. And again, it's up to you how you want to create the design or the letters, right? If you're a person who's familiar with fonts and you know how to do letters, how to do handwriting, cursive writing, whatever it is, and you want to do it that way, then by all means. Or if you don't want to use any words and you want it just to be an image, then do that. My suggestion is, if it's your first time or you're not too comfortable with this process, start with something simple. Start with a couple of colors, maybe not 3 colors. Start with like 2 colors. And keep your design as simple as possible. Remember, think bold, think not a lot of detail, something that's going to be easy for you to cut out. Okay, so this looks good. Like if I applied enough paint across everything, yeah. Now I gently start peeling up the tape and removing the final stencil. Let's see how this is gonna look. Put this up to the side. Very cool. So there you go. Here's the final design, right? It says rise up. We have the rising sun, the 2 colors. The 2 colors in the background with the 3rd color on the top being the black, right? And like I said, if you had prepped or made other backgrounds, then you would have all your backgrounds of yellow done, and then after that, all the backgrounds with the middle color, and then after all those are dry, then you start applying this final color to all the other posters. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing over here so it can dry a little bit. And just so I can kind of show you all. So this is the stencil I use for the first design, right? So here's the stencil cut out. Again, you can save these if they didn't tear up the first time around. And then this is the stencil for, this is the stencil for the Black Lives Matter text that I had done a little earlier. Kind of sticking to this other paper here. So basically, yeah, you can definitely save them if you're careful with them, right? So here's the one that I use for the Black Lives Matter, right? So I can definitely use this for another poster if I wanted to. So I just put a sheet behind it to kind of protect it. And yeah, I'll be able to use this one. I'll be able to use my flame. And now I'll also be able to use my Rise Up stencil and my Rising Sun stencil. So I'll be able to put these away, hopefully use them for some screen printing prints. But once these are totally like warped, then yeah, then you can just toss them and you can make more now that you know how to make them. Cool. So that's the Black Lives Matter and the Rise Up.
So, Ernesto, where can folks find you on social media?
On social media, let me go ahead and write that down. I have my info here. It's a little hard to tell, but if any, hard to see, I mean, but if anything, let me go ahead and write it down over here.
Oh, so somebody has an interesting question while you're writing that.
Yes.
If you were to use food, would you use it the same as the ink, or there are other things to consider?
Yeah, so with food, it's always also a trial and error. So test before you really start, like on your fine paper, I guess, or have an extra paper that you're going to apply it onto, and then test it out there first. Because the way I did it, the way I tried it, there were some condiments that were a little watery compared to others, or I found some condiments that were not as that didn't have as much pigment, I suppose, and were just kind of very translucent, and they were the same, like the same stuff, like just different ketchups, let's say. And so there was one brand of ketchup or one type of ketchup that was a little bit, I guess, a little bit more opaque than another brand of ketchup. So it's just going to be a little bit of a trial and error. But some of the things that I found that worked really well with certain colors were like turmeric, the what's called the spice, or the spice turmeric worked really well for like a yellow color, and so did mustard. So for a yellow, yeah, either turmeric or mustard. For like a dark brown color, I use like a soy sauce or a instant coffee. So you get like a little bit of powdered instant coffee, add a little bit of water, and then just kind of make it into that, yeah, like a little sludge, and then you can use that.
And
Um,
you also get to enjoy the coffee smell.
and then you enjoy the coffee afterwards. Yeah, but yeah, it does smell pretty good. It's funny because when I was making them, yeah, my whole my whole workstation smelled like hot dogs because of the ketchup and the mustard, the soy sauce, and all of that. But yeah, it was really cool experimenting with that. But I would say, yeah, experiment with those first because yeah, you never really know. I mean, you're using stuff that isn't meant to be used for painting. Yeah, but I have my information here. So it's Ernesto Vazquez at Eve Illustrations, right? So you can find me on Instagram or mainly Instagram. I don't really do Facebook. I don't do the Twitter. I don't do anything else. It's pretty much usually Instagram where I share my artwork. And through there, you guys can also uh, have access to my website. And my website, there's also information and more artwork and stuff. But yeah, basically, this is the best way to check out some of my artwork and to get a hold of me. If you guys want to get a hold of me for either future workshops or just to check out stuff that I'm doing, just check out my artwork. Go ahead and log on here.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much, Ernesto, for leading this workshop. Just reiterate somebody's comment. I love
Yeah.
how patient you are with your work. Thank you so much for sharing your love of your art and your work. So yeah, thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And yes, of course, I always love sharing my thought process and my art process with people, especially printmaking. I've loved printmaking and just love sharing it with people so they're able to do it at home. So again, you don't necessarily need to be able to have expensive equipment to be able to do printmaking at home. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you again, Ernesto, for all the attendees. Don't forget, this workshop is part of our ladies exhibition, which you can find on the CSPG website at politicalgraphics.org. Just look under exhibitions tab and you'll find it there. And thank you again so much, Ernesto, and thank you everybody for joining us.